The agenda in my presentation today is basically these two things. What do we mean by leading from a position of strength, especially when it comes to challenging times like this, when we might be more prone to focus on areas of weakness or areas that we need to develop? So I'm going to define what we mean by that, and that's going to come from positive psychology. So this is going to be a little bit of a primer on what positive psychology is. And then I am going to talk about 3 specific tips, techniques that you can apply immediately after this workshop. And they will address the way that we feel about things, so the emotional space, the way we think about things, the mental space, and then 1 tip around our behavior and how we can behave, all in an effort to come from a position of strength during these challenging times. And then I'm going to leave some time for questions and answers. So let's get started here. I'm just going to change my view over here just a little bit. All right. So why lead with strengths? You know, the traditional models of improvement, the traditional psychological model, for example, clinical psychology, or the medical model, you know, if you go to a hospital or see a doctor, or the traditional business model, if you're running a business or some kind of entrepreneurial venture, we normally, as human beings, this is the way we function, we focus on the areas of weakness. Here's what's most unprofitable. Here's what's going on with me mentally. You know, mental health is a big buzzword in organizations these days. You go to a doctor, here's my ailment, right? And so we focus on the things that are going wrong in an effort to remove the pain, remove the unprofitability, remove the things that we need to develop. The World Health Organization, however, says the absence of illness doesn't mean we're in a state of well-being. So if we removed all of the illness from the world, if COVID-19 by some miracle disappeared tomorrow, the question becomes, will we be in a position of strength? Will we have increased our well-being? And positive psychology attempts to answer that question. So positive psychology attempts to answer, what are those things that we as human beings can nourish within ourselves, can harness from within ourselves, that would take us north of neutral? Because according to the World Health Organization, getting rid of just what's wrong will allow us to improve, but we'll really flourish, we'll really thrive, we'll really seek fulfillment from our lives if, in addition to that, we also focus on what's right. So that's the domain of positive psychology, kind of completes the cycle of clinical psychology by taking a holistic approach to us as human beings. And once we start nourishing what's right, in addition to focusing what's wrong, we feel differently, we behave differently, and that then transcends into everything else that we do. Once we're feeling good and behaving in a certain way, we can bring our best versions to the table, and that allows us to perform very differently than if we just focus on what's going wrong. So what might that look like during a time of crisis? So let's just say hypothetically, we're able to measure our well-being, and it ranges on a number line from -10 to +10, right? And before COVID-19, for example, let's just say, pick an arbitrary number, you know, my level of well-being was a level 3. By the way, we can measure these things, and the advantage of coming from the psychological sciences is that these things that I'm going to talk about today in positive psychology in general has the advantage of being studied in depth, being peer-reviewed. Studies are replicated, and then conclusions are drawn. And in general, this is how human beings behave. So it's informed by science. It's not just, you know, some woo-woo stuff that you might hear some people say, just do this and this will happen. So it's quite informed. And so if we were to measure our well-being, and let's say it's 3, you know, just natural course of life, day-to-day things, some things drag us down and some things lift us up. And so what might be dragging us down during a time of crisis might be more sustained because we're constantly surrounded by them. We're surrounded by uncertainty, ambiguity, we might be depleted physically, mentally, demands different types of worries. So our well-being gets dragged down. At the same time, we have some tools available to us, moments of positive emotions, for example. One of the things that I've been watching is, I don't know if you saw that, Facebook, John Krasinski's Some Good News videos. I think they're awesome. They always uplift my spirits. Positive emotions in the form of seeing the tremendous work that the healthcare workers are doing. It's literally awe-inspiring in many cases. And so things like that lift my spirits up. Engagement, things that absorb my attention. These types of interactions, webinars, coaching, helping clients during this time is something that absorbs my attention, lifts my spirit up. Relationships, whether it's in the form of social support or, just taking care of loved ones, having conversations through the use of technology is a blessing during these times. What type of meaningfulness might I derive from these circumstances, and having goals and accomplishing them? These are examples of things that lift us up where other things might be dragging us down. And so these are examples of some what we call pathways that increase our well-being. And so the purpose of showing you this graph is that well-being is not one sustained, level of position that you're always going to be in. As human beings, we're always going to face some things that will drag us down. The key is knowing what tools to harness to pull ourselves back up again. And so some examples over here that you see are in green over here, examples of what we call pathways. In the language of positive psychology, pathways to well-being, right? And so these are depicted over here. And the reason I'm showing these 5 pathways to well-being, these are one of the most widely studied ones. So positive psychology was founded at the University of Pennsylvania by Dr. Marty Seligman. I have the good fortune of working with him at Penn. And so these are some of the most heavily researched ones, but these aren't the only ones. There are other models of well-being as well, for example, that include resilience, our physical health, which we call vitality, mastery of our environment, strengths of character, optimism, self-esteem, and, the list goes on. There's several of those. Each of those have been researched and provide us different activities and exercises that we can undertake in order to improve our well-being. I'm going to share with you 3 tips from some of these things that will hopefully help you to cope better during these times and allow us to come from a position of strength. Let's start with the first one. And the first one are positive emotions. And so applying positive emotions in our lives generally just puts us in a better mood, a pleasurable mood. Positive emotions have the wonderful property of inducing pleasure in our lives. Interest, hope, pride, inspiration, awe, love, serenity, contentment are all examples of positive emotions. But then you could ask me, well, yeah, we're surrounded by negative emotions though during these days. There are some really challenging circumstances that people are going through. Small business owners, right? Losing their livelihood, for example. There's death, right? There's illness, there's suffering, there's so much. And so what benefit can positive emotions do us in those things? So I don't want you to leave today's session thinking that I'm saying don't acknowledge the negative emotions. Definitely acknowledge them, because we as human beings are meant to experience a full spectrum of emotions. However, in order to increase our well-being, in order to bounce up from things that are dragging us down, we need to be able to pull ourselves up and not stay steeped in a state of negative emotions. Why? Because the research shows, and this is research done by a seminal researcher in emotion science. Her name is Barbara Fredrickson. And what Barbara says is positive emotions have the unique ability to undo the impact of negative emotions. However, we need more positive emotions to undo the impact of negative emotions. So let's just say I've had, an unpleasant interaction with someone that I like, but I had an angry conversation with them. So that's induced negative emotions. In order to undo that, I have to induce more positive emotions to undo it. But they do get undone, right? So positive emotions undoes the effect of negative emotions. They broaden our awareness. The research shows literally our peripheral vision increases when we're in a state of positive emotions. We're more likely to bond with other people. In these times, that's what we need more of. Emotional contagion is a very real concept, right? IQ doesn't transfer, but EQ does. Emotional intelligence, emotions do transfer across people, right? And then there's some experiments that show we boost our immune system. So we're less likely to get a cold, for example, when we expose ourselves to more positive emotions. Then the question becomes, well, okay, how should we do this? I'm going to give you two things that will help. The first is gratitude. Despite all the odds, despite the crisis, despite all of these circumstances, I, for example, I'm grateful that I have access to technology. I'm grateful that I can do these webinars. I'm grateful that I'm able to work from home. I'm grateful for the relationships that I have. There are so many things that we can be grateful for. And gratefulness is like we receive a gift. And we get in the moment when we appreciate the gift that we receive. It takes us out of that negative space and puts us in a more appreciative, hopeful, interesting state of mind. The emotional state changes when we express gratitude for something. It takes away from things that we tend to take for granted, right? So it puts us in a positive emotional space. So at the end of the day, try and think of three things. They don't have to be really big, grandiose things. Just three things that you're grateful for. In my case, having this technology, having the ability to go to the grocery store to buy eggs, these days, that's a really, really pleasant experience for me. Yes, I've got to go out to buy eggs. But it's a small thing, but I'm grateful that I don't have to be cooped up in the house 24 hours. I can go out to the park, for example, right? Something I'm grateful for. Focusing on things that you're grateful for allows you to not stay steeped in those negative emotions and induces positive emotions such that we start undoing the effect of negative emotions. So focus on three things. Maybe you can journal those. The other thing is this loving kindness meditation as a way to induce love. Love is one of the most experienced, well, it is the most experienced positive emotion in the world, right? It's expressed most frequently. And so you might have heard of mindfulness meditation. There's another form of meditation called loving kindness meditation, which is more of an emotional meditation. Barbara Fredrickson calls this, instead of meditation of the mind, she calls it a meditation of the heart. And it starts with the self, and then it spreads outwards towards others. And this is what it looks like. And you can Google loving kindness meditation, and there are several iterations of this. This is one that I like to use, and you can modify the language of this. But the key is this: it's broken up into three sections, and you sit and meditate for a while, 15, 20 minutes, or however much time you have, and you focus on the self first from a loving emotional standpoint. May I be safe, may I be healthy, may I be protected from dangers, may my heart be filled with love. Right? And so you sit with that for a little bit, and you really, get deep with that. Think about it. Put yourself in a loving emotional space towards yourself. And then you express that outwards towards others, maybe immediate others that are in your circle of love, right? May you be safe, may you be healthy, protected from dangers, and may your heart be filled with love. Then you sit with that. And then you express that outwards to a wider circle of others. And see how it affects your emotional space. When you invite this type of love to yourself and express it outwards towards your others, you're moving from a selfish state to a selfless one, where you're expressing the emotion of love outwards towards others. And see if that uplifts you just a little bit and takes you out of that negative space through meditation. So those are the two things. Practice gratitude and gratefulness. Doesn't have to be really big, grandiose things. And see if you can practice loving kindness meditation. If you have any more questions around this, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm going to leave my contact details at the end as well. So that's the emotional piece that I wanted to talk about. The second piece is more of a cognitive, or the way that we think tip that I wanted to share with you. And that's to generate optimism. And, many people ask me, how can we remain optimistic during this time where we're surrounded by ambiguity, uncertainty, and a lot of sadness in the world for whatever reason? Whether we're directly impacted by COVID-19 through the disease or the repercussions of that, being isolated at home, etc. How can we be optimistic? Optimism is a cognitive state. It's a way that we think about the world, more particularly the causes of events. The causes of events. And if we look at COVID-19, there's a lot of hope. Because if there was no hope, the world wouldn't be coming together. All of the healthcare providers wouldn't be coming together. The pharmaceutical industry wouldn't be coming together. We would be hopeless. But the fact that we have hope means that we can generate goals and we can work towards achieving those goals. So one goal was to flatten the curve. And so that's why we're isolated. If we had no hope that we can indeed flatten the curve, we wouldn't have needed to be staying at home and isolating ourselves. But we had a goal that we need to flatten the curve, and we have hope that we would do that, and the mechanism for doing that would be isolating ourselves. That's an example of optimism, that things can be done. Goals can be achieved. Right? So optimism generates hope for us to achieve goals and make us more resilient, because life would truly be tragic if we had goals but no hope to achieve them. So how do we go about doing this? So Marty Seligman, again, the founder of positive psychology, has done a lot of research on optimism. And what he says is it starts by asking ourselves a question. Remember I said it's the way that we think. Optimism is the way that we think. It starts by asking ourselves, what are the causes of bad events? And so the bad events that we're surrounded with right now is the spread of the disease, COVID-19. It's a crisis. So we ask ourselves, is this my fault? And the answer to that is no, it's not. It's not our fault. We didn't start the disease. The cause of the disease is not my fault. So it's not personal. Right? The second question is it specific to this one situation? And the answer is yes. This bad event, the fact that I'm isolated, speaking to you from my house right now, and I'm not able to go out and socialize like I want to, is specific to this one instance of COVID-19. I still have my relationships. I'm still fortunate to be able to work. I still have other domains of my life, still have my community of friends that I belong to, professional community that I belong to, etc. There are other things in my life that are working for me. So it's not pervasive. It's not undermining absolutely everything else in my life. So it's specific, this bad situation is just specific to this one area of my life, which is COVID-19. The third question is, will this last forever? And the likely answer to that is no. It's not going to last forever. We will develop some kind of remediation for this, whether it's in the form of a vaccine or precautions or whatever that might look like. This isn't going to be, forever and ever. So we will eventually conquer this. The world's best minds are working towards this. And so if we answer these questions in this manner, that the causes of bad events aren't personal, they aren't pervasive, and they are temporary, that's an example of thinking optimistically. As opposed to thinking, oh, it's my fault that this is happening. This is pervasive across all domains of my life. There's absolutely nothing in my life that is working for me right now. And this is going to last forever. It's permanent. That's a pessimist way of thinking. And if we realistically appraise this current situation, we'll find that the answers to this is as I described earlier. It's not my fault, specific to this one situation, and it won't last forever. So from a thinking standpoint, the tip is I'm going to encourage you to think optimistically so that you can generate hope for achieving the goals that you set for yourself, because that's what's going to allow you to bounce back up and become more resilient and increase your well-being. The last tip that I have is more of a behavioral type of a tip. This is the way that we act and harness your strengths. And by strengths over here, I mean strengths of character, not doing things, but ways that we behave. So am I behaving compassionately? Am I being perseverant, for example? Am I behaving in a kind manner? Am I behaving honestly? Am I behaving creatively? So ways in which we show up. If I'm showing up agitated, aggravated, sad, anxious, nervous, uncertain, I'm not stepping into a way that will allow me to behave in a manner that's using my strengths. I'm behaving in a manner that is tapping into perhaps a weak side of mine. When we make the intention to be a certain way, if I make the intention to be honest, my behavior is going to be different than if I don't make that intention. So intentionality is really important in order for us to step into our strengths, allows us to be resilient, and increases the likelihood of us feeling better and functioning more effectively. This is what it looks like. It allows us to step into a persona, a version of ourselves where we become deliberate on who we need to be. See, in life, it's not just about doing things. I need to do this, do that, do, whatever it is. It's about who we're being while we're doing the things. Am I being kind, being perseverant, being loving? That then allows me to do things differently. And that's what allows us to be resilient, feel better about ourselves, and function more effectively. In fact, the research shows that if we step into these strengths of character, and this is research done by Marty Seligman and Chris Peterson, and they categorize these 24 strengths. There can be more of them, but these are the ones that have been really heavily researched. If we are intentional about being these, being loving, being socially intelligent, being non-judgmental, being fair, being someone who acts with humility, being grateful, it allows us to feel better about ourselves and function more effectively by up to 18 times. Imagine increasing the likelihood of feeling better about yourself and functioning more effectively by up to 18 times. And the research shows this, right? That's what lifts us up when things are dragging us down, and so that we can increase our well-being. So I want to leave some time for questions. And so the three things that I'm going to leave you with is the emotional space. Don't stay in the negative space. See if you can generate positive emotions. And the two tips are through gratitude and loving kindness meditation. How can you generate a way of thinking that's optimistic as opposed to pessimistic? And how can you choose to be a version of yourself that's operating from a position of strengths? And then that will allow you to do things slightly differently in a more favorable way. I will stop talking, and we've got a few minutes for questions. And Jana, I'll ask you to facilitate the questions, please.
Yeah, of course. So you guys know you can either type it in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourselves, you're welcome to as well.
And so I'll just leave this on for a brief while. You can get my contact details, and then I'll stop sharing my screen so maybe I can see you or hear you. Yeah.
Hey, Fasial, it's Jake. I just joined about halfway through. It's good to see you.
Hey, Jake. Nice to see you as well.
It's cool. So I actually came in during you had already started the meditation portion. I just wanted to ask, are you familiar with Jack Kornfield? Because he's actually a teacher I had discovered loving kindness meditation through.
Awesome. I'm not, but I'll definitely look him up. Yeah.
Yeah.
How's your experience been with that, Jake?
It's good. Like many people, well, I'm kind of diffusing responsibility, but I don't practice as much as I should.
Right.
But I can't deny like how effective it has been. I think like in the moment, definitely, but like a lot of things, I think it kind of just tunes your mind in a certain way. So even if I'm not as consistent with it as I would like to be, I think it definitely still influences your life. And I think that's a tip I would throw out there to people. And it kind of goes with another point you made about gratitude. They don't have to be, these grandiose things that you're thinking of, like, what am I grateful for? Or, just kind of poring over little things or everything. Just allowing yourself to, kind of bring yourself into the moment and realize like, wow, this coffee is great. I'm so thankful for that. And again, it just sort of like tunes your mind in that direction. And even if I'm not like constantly saying, which I don't think you should, every moment say, I'm thankful that, I'm thankful. I think it can kind of get neurotic.
Yeah, true.
But again, even in troubling times, I'll be shocked when I'm appreciating something so small as like a coffee or like my cat walking into the room. And just like, oh, wow, there's a moment of levity there, even if, all this other crazy stuff is going on. So
yeah, absolutely.
Just comments.
No, great.
But
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all that. I think it's helpful.
Any other questions, comments?
So it doesn't seem like there's anything in the chat, but thank you, Jake, for that. It's very insightful. I guess we can end it off here. And if anybody